These are just our learning intentions for today. So as you can see, we have 4 of those for you. And after this training as a learner for our PD today, you should be able to identify evidence-based peer and self-assessment strategies that you can use within and across your content areas, monitor your fidelity of implementation of peer and self-assessment strategies, monitor the changes in student engagement and learning as a function of implementation. And then you'll have the opportunity to share those outcomes with others if you choose to come back with us on April 20th, which we hope you all do. You will also have the opportunity to evaluate, maintain, and sustain a continuum of evidence-based formative assessment strategies, specifically during this session for self and peer assessment, and you will do that through a PLC if you choose. So you can evaluate yourself as a successful learner today if after our training you are able to do these 3 items: describe and implement that continuum of evidence-based peer and self-assessment strategies. If you're collecting those permanent products to assess any positive changes in academic behavior, social emotional growth, you'll also be able to evaluate your pre and post, and I'll get into that in a little bit further on. And also, if you can contribute meaningfully information and experiences in that PLC, if you all choose to do so. I think we do have some teams here today, and through the use of those formative assessment strategies. So we are just going to take a minute real quick and gauge our learners for today. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen. I think my colleague is going to put this in the chat for you. The Menti that we're going to do today. So hopefully we can, let me reshare here.
I just put that in, Amanda.
Okay, so can everyone see the Mentimeter screen now? Yes, no? It says describe yourself as a learner using 2 adjectives. If you go to www.menti.com and put in this code, as you put in those 2 adjectives to describe yourself as a learner today, we should be seeing it pop up here. Eva, are you seeing the white screen?
I do see the screen. Okay. Is the link active in the chat? Yep, it must be because I see some.
Yeah, now we're good. Okay, I got worried for a second.
Me too.
Okay, so I'm really excited. I'll share my 2 adjectives. I'm not going to go to another screen, but I'm really eager and excited about this presentation today and to share this information with you. I can see as some of these are coming in, we have motivated learners, which is awesome for Eva and I. Hopefully that means that you'll be engaged as a learner and participate with us. It can get difficult on Zoom sometimes if we don't have that. Okay, some people are interested in growing in their practice. They're focused, which is awesome. Interested, wonderful. And we'll just give it another minute or so as they're coming in. Okay. Well, the majority of our learners, Eva, are motivated, interested, and focused. So I don't know that we could ask for a better crowd today.
Absolutely. The scholars are on board, right?
Yes, that's perfect. So you can keep putting those in. It should also, if you're using a phone or your device, it will keep updating as we go through this. So we're going to move on from this. I'll go back to my PowerPoint here.
And if you've ever used that in class, it's a good way to get, honestly, a self-assessment. It's a good modeling strategy. The larger the word, the more frequent the response. So you can engage in inform your instruction on that.
Okay. So thank you for participating in that. Just helps us get to understand you a little bit as a learner. So here's our schedule for today. As you can see, I'm kicking it off today. We will do a teacher reflection in a few slides. I had talked about that and I'll explain it. I'm just going to go through really some general ideas here. Then Eva is going to take it away and do formative assessment, the big picture. Formative assessment is a huge topic, and you can see here she's going to do that in a very short amount of time. Then we'll do a brief introduction to what is peer and self-assessment, look at a clip from Dylan William at that point, and then Eva's really going to take you through student self-assessment, and you'll have some time to explore those strategies. After we come back from that, we'll take a little break because you'll probably be ready for one by then. And then I'll be going through peer assessment, and then we'll wrap it up with implementation steps, recommendations for a PLC. And if you do choose to come back on April 20th, a presentation template that you can use. So I'm going to actually, Sherry, if you can put the Padlet link into the chat, and I'm actually going to move to that screen now. So let me do that. And I'm just going to briefly go through some of the things that you'll see on our Padlet today. Eva, can you give me a thumbs up if we're able to see? Okay, perfect. So the first two here in Get Ready, I'm going to highlight these two. First, we have the high leverage practice. These are 22 different high leverage practices that you can be using in your classroom. This document, you'll see that we did bold some of those high leverage practices. Those are those practices that are going to directly relate to what we're doing here today with formative assessment and peer and self-assessment strategies. The second document that you can see here, I'm sure if you're in education, you know about this document. This is the Danielson framework. It's what most of, well, pretty much everybody is evaluated using. And I do want to just point out two of the four domains, domain 1 and domain 3. So planning and preparation and then learning experiences. Specific within those two domains, a lot of those components are going to relate to the practices that we're talking about today. Specifically, the most obvious ones are 1F and 3D. So those are the ones that are really gearing towards using assessment, making instructional decisions, and changing your practice. So I just wanted to highlight that. We also have some formative assessment big picture items. You can see that the Padlet is really organized in just the way of our presentation today. And then we have the intro to peer and self-assessment. Further on, you'll see self-assessment and then peer assessment documents. And these are really tools that you can use when you go back into the classroom, and we will have time to explore this during our presentation. And then some additional resources here. And this is really for that PLC work that we're hoping you'll take part in. This will be part of the rating. And like I said, we'll talk about it. I keep talking about it, but I will eventually get into that. And then the team presentation, this is a template that you can use when you come back on April 20th. So hopefully you'll find these resources helpful. And I'm going to go back to our PowerPoint now. Okay, so we went through the high leverage practices, specifically Danielson, looking at domain 1 and 3. And it's time for Eva. Take it away.
Thanks, Amanda, and thank you all for being here today. We know it's a challenge to get subs if you don't have an in-service day, so your presence and participation are greatly appreciated. All right, we're going to talk about some high leverage strategies and this overall big picture of what formative assessment is. Go ahead, Amanda. So looking at the 4 types of assessment that we have formative, diagnostic, benchmark, and summative. I'm not going to read slides to you, but just to highlight what they are in a broad sense, when we think of formative assessment, how are we informing our instruction? How are we informed by the students' feedback and learning? So again, identify strategies to improve. Diagnostic tests, those are related to the CDL, or you may perhaps you do a MAP test to really identify the strengths and areas of growth around a student's learning. Benchmark or interim assessments, those are the progress monitoring assessments that we often use to check to see if a student is making progress and how to maybe tailor any interventions or strategies that students need in order to continue their growth and continue those learning outcomes. And summative assessments are just that. There is a sum or a quantity attached to them. These do not live in isolation. Sometimes a summative assessment can be used to inform strategies around what we need to do for targeted learning. Go ahead, Amanda. And like I said, the interdependence, these don't live in isolation. Last session, if you were with us, we talked about questioning and discussion techniques, and feedback will come up in today's session. We're going to go through each of these just briefly, and then we're going to really focus in and hone on self and peer assessment. So taking a look at what learning intentions are targeted goals. What is the expectation? What is it that you want your students to do, and how are they going to get there are the success criteria. As Amanda pointed out in our beginning slides, she really highlighted what you are expected to take away from today's session. And those are the success criteria. But looking at our learning intentions, that is the path you're going to take to get there. So they're brief statements that really look at what a student is going to be able to do by the end of instruction. And it's a common understanding, and it supports self-monitoring. So how am I reflecting upon my learning along the way? And what is it that I am supposed to be able to do successfully at the end? So the students will be able to do. Connecting it back to the Danielson framework, this is a lot that lives in domain 1. Again, looking at making sure that we're hitting targets. Students can hit any target they can see that holds still for them for a moment. Think of, taking back a bow and arrow. If you can't see the bullseye, how are you going to hit the target? So really making sure that that target is not moving and we're not changing what the success criteria and the learning intention is. I've been in spaces where a lot of times, even as a learner, we begin doing one thing and then we end up in a space where I'm not sure how we got there. So being very explicit and concrete in terms of what the expectation is and how they are going to get there. Success criteria really is what you want to think of. What are your look-fors? When you want a student to identify how they met that growth or how they met that target, it is explicit. Think about a rubric, right? What are you looking at when you look at rubrics? When we get to them, we are going to actually take you through a couple to show you how you can utilize those in your classrooms. And it gives a concrete way, and also can be used as a summative. But how is it informing where students are going along the way? Here are some examples of learning intentions and success. I can't say that word today. Success criteria. Our learning intentions would be something like using trigonomic ratios to the sides of triangles to find missing information. So that's what we're intending to do in the space. And then how am I going to know if I met that goal? If I can describe what a trigonomic ratios are and why they exist, really looking at that why, then I know that I met that learning intention. I met my goal, I hit the target. And another example would be to articulate what information is given and how we can use it. And what does that look like? It's meaning describing ratios corresponding to which trigonomic function. I am not a math person, so this is foreign language to me. So if anyone wants to add voice to it, I am very much a literacy-based person. So you math experts that are out there, this may resonate deeper with you than it does with me. Again, so my learning intention would be to understand what trigonometry is and what would my success criteria be, being able to speak to it in a way that someone on the other end can understand. So that's my learning intention, and I know what my success criteria is going to be. How many times have you been in a professional development and you're like, what are we talking about? I'm so lost. Why does this pertain to me? Right? So talking about the why is also a culturally responsive practice, understanding what make sense to me. How does this impact me? So really those two elevate the importance of being explicit in what the learning intention is and how a student is going to be recognized for being successful. Go ahead, Amanda. And just to let you know quickly, we will upload a copy of the PowerPoint at the end of today's session. So you have everything at your fingertips and you can go back and review anything that you want to at a later time. So here's my jam, the learning examples for ELA. So for literacy, a learning intention maybe know how advertisers persuade techniques in advertisements. How do I know that I met that learning intention? I can describe how hard soft sells conveyed, explain the positive and negative emotions in advertisement. And it's really interesting to see what students being able to peel back the layers in advertising once they actually reach that learning intention. You can't unsee some of the learning in that space, especially when it comes to how persuasive advertisers are. Thanks, Amanda. And feedback. Feedback is one of my favorite forms of formative assessment. We get feedback every time our feet hit the floor in the morning, whether it be from our children, whether it be from our dog. We are constantly looking at our environment and guiding our decisions based on that. When you have the microcosm or the ecosystem in your classroom, feedback really is a relational activity. How you express yourself and how you provide feedback to students really can set the tone for any learning and just how your school culture or your classroom culture and climate operates on a daily basis. So position yourself in the seat of a learner when providing feedback. When are you getting feedback from your administrator or someone who is observing you? How do you want to receive the feedback? What do you want the feedback to sound like? So thinking about that, I just want you to put in the chat quickly, how do you provide feedback? Or what's important about feedback in your classroom? Just quickly share out a couple ideas. And positive tone and encourage further thinking. Yes, thank you. Is it Kelly?
Yes.
Thanks, Kelly. Starting with positives. Absolutely. Thanks, Faith. Back and forth. So open dialogue. Thank you, Mr. Kaufman. So as those are coming in, just to really highlight some feedback that is important to consider, making sure that it is really connected to the learning and the phase of learning and being able to move the learning forward. Making sure that it's instructive. What is it that I can do? What recipe can I follow to meet that success criteria along the way? Is it balanced? Consider how much. I know some of our learners who are in different spaces in terms of where they are in their learning may need more feedback, and that can be overwhelming. So when you think about how much, starting with the positive, starting with back and forth, being open, starting with the positive is an excellent strategy to use when providing feedback, especially when we have a lot of work to do. So I always say, how do we eat an elephant? One bite at a time. If we had to look at everything that we had to fix, then we would be overwhelmed, and that can shut a student down. So, and again, making sure that it's timely and delivered. Thinking about being, as I was being observed, I'd get a informal observation slip in my mailbox 3 weeks later from a lesson. So thinking about, am I providing the feedback that's really matching where we are in the lesson? Is it coming at a timely and supportive way? And thank you for those who have participated. I love the fact that you said individual and simple and stay positive. So that was a common theme among the chat conversation. So I really just want to draw attention to the three green blocks at the top. These three questions are really what guide formative instruction as a whole. Where is the learner going? Again, learning intentions and success criteria from the teacher, peer, and learner perspective. Where is the learner? Where are they? How do we get there? Through discussions. Again, peer and self-assessment. We're going to highlight those today. And how am I going to get there? What is the feedback that is going to take me to meet my goal? And Sherry just dropped a link in the chat, and it's about from Learning Sciences, so you can explore a little bit deeper formative assessment as a whole. So I'm going to turn it back over to Amanda.
Thank you, Eva. Okay, so let's get into peer and self-assessment. So this is that survey that I was talking about, or reflection that I was talking about. And we're going to look at how we gauge our own areas of growth within formative assessment, really specific to peer and self-assessment. So you can see here that these are the 5 components that are required for teachers to successfully implement peer and self-assessment. And this is how we're actually going to be dropping in the chat a Google form for you to complete, and it's broken down by these 5 sections. So planning for student self-assessment, developing students' understanding of the success criteria, working with that criteria, teaching students about self-assessment, and then developing goal setting skills. So before you complete the survey, I do want you to send the survey results to yourself, and that will be important because this is really your pre-assessment on your knowledge of what you're doing in your knowledge of peer and self-assessment, and also what you're currently doing in your classroom. So there should be an option on Google to send survey results to yourself. So please do that. If you don't, or you can't find it, don't worry. We'll give you my contact and I can send you individual results. That's fine. And then, like I said, we're going to be doing this after implementation as well. So there are about 30 plus prompts. So what I'm going to do, and this is a strategy or a tool that, not a tool, but I don't know. I'm going to turn my camera off. It's a timing method that Eva and I are going to use. Can't think of a word for it, but I'm going to turn my camera off for about 15 minutes and then I'll actually 10. I'll pop back on at 10 minutes, check, see where we are with this. And then if people aren't ready, that's fine. Just throw it in the chat and we'll give you a couple more minutes. And that's just how we're going to key that you're working in groups today. Did you want to add anything, Eva?
No, I'm good. I'll turn my
Okay.
camera off and they can get started. So we'll
All
see you
right.
back here in about 10 minutes or when your cameras come back on.
Thank you.
If you have questions, we are here just to also let you know.
Okay, so that was about 10 minutes. So if anyone still needs time, or if you could just throw that in the chat and we can give you a few more minutes before we move on to the next section. Okay, so I'm thinking everyone had enough time, so that's good. Hopefully, as you were completing that, you can identify some areas of growth for yourself within formative assessment, specifically to peer and self-assessment. So that is our hope with that. And then, like I said, at the end of implementation, we'll do it again and we'll be able to see the areas that we've improved. So now we're going to watch a very brief clip. This is about 2 minutes. It's Dylan William talking about students being able to activate their learning and students as their own learners. So I'm going to go ahead and play it. Eva, if you can just give me a thumbs up when you start to hear it. Real quick, before I go back to the video, I want you to think about 2 things during this video, and we're going to do a waterfall chat afterwards. So if you could think about one thing that you already knew that he mentions, and then also one thing that was relatively new. So maybe not brand new, but you haven't thought about it in a while. I just wanted to set that up for you.
When we started working on formative assessment, or assessment for learning as it's sometimes called, we were focusing very much on feedback. So we started with feedback because that's where the research was most clearly organized. We then realized that unless you'd asked the right question, then feedback wasn't very useful. So questioning and feedback came into the equation together. As we worked with teachers to implement this in classrooms, we discovered you couldn't change what the teacher was doing without changing what the students were doing. And in particular, the importance of student self-assessment, what we sometimes call activating students as owners of their own learning, and peer assessment, or what we sometimes call activating students as teaching resources for one another, assumed much greater salience. Now, when we talk about peer assessment, a lot of people immediately assume we're just talking about having kids marking each other's work so that the teacher doesn't have to do it. And people always get the wrong idea, because that's summative peer assessment. What we have discovered is that formative peer assessment, where students are helping each other improve their work, has benefits for the person who receives feedback, but also has benefits for the person who gives the feedback. Because in thinking through what it is that this piece of work represents and what needs to happen to improve it, the students are forced to internalize the success criteria, and they're able to do it in the context of somebody else's work, which is less emotionally charged than your own. So what we see routinely now, we see it very, very commonly, is when students have given feedback to others about a piece of work, their own subsequent attempts at that same work are much improved, because they are now much clearer about what good work in that task looks like. So that's been, and I think one of the real breakthroughs is just the real benefit of peer and self-assessment, both for the person who is doing the assessment, self-assessment, and the person who's giving feedback, the peer assessment. We see students being very, very effective commentators on each other's work and giving very, very sound advice, sometimes a lot harder than the teacher would give. One of the things that you see quite routinely in classrooms is children being much tougher on each other than the teacher would dare to be, because of the emotional relationships and the power relationships there. But actually, it's generally pretty much spot on.
Okay, so if everyone could open your chat, and I would like you to first enter one thing that you knew that Dylan Williams mentioned in that clip. Do not hit enter yet. I'm going to give you a minute, maybe a minute and a half. And then when I say enter, we'll all enter and we'll see a waterfall of all the things that were coming into with this and we already knew. And Sherry did put a link into that video if you want to take that back and share with any of your colleagues. Okay, let's go ahead and hit enter, all the things that we knew. Okay, so let me just share a couple. That peers tend to be harder than the teacher. Yeah, he talks about those relationships. Peer assessment can be an effective tool. Assessment for learning and feedback. Feedback from others can help improve your work, activates learning. I love that, asking the right questions to get the right feedback. And I think that's really tricky. And if you attended our questioning and discussion session, I think we hit on that there too. how important that feedback is, how important and critical it is. It's vital for the learning process. It's a general theme I'm seeing here. Great. Okay, thank you all for sharing. And let's get ready. And we're going to do one more waterfall. So one thing that was relatively new that he mentioned during this video, something that was a newer concept for you. Oh. Hey, it's trash day.
The human aspect. And you can turn your cameras back on. I know that we mentioned about turning your cameras off. That was just to gauge where you were. So please feel free to turn on your cameras. It was great seeing some faces. Looks like a lot of people are in buildings today.
Yeah, and if you
Sherry,
can
we
go,
know that you're
Okay.
the exception.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead and hit enter. Sorry about that pause there. Okay, so a new thing, idea of formative and peer assessment. They do better after the feedback. And I think that was something new for me as we began to explore. Okay, so the newer concept for some was that kids are tougher than their teacher with the feedback. Very good. Something that stood out to me too was we often think it's just commenting on the work and it's an escape for the teacher, and it's not. It's really to affect their learning and that process of learning. TLC would be so proud of, oh, Mr. Kaufman, you're a jammer, TLC, yes. Okay, very proud of this waterfall. It did go very well. So thank you all for participating. Without your participation, it would be very difficult for Eva and I. So we do appreciate you being engaged with us. Okay, so moving on here. Oh, sorry. And I believe this is you, Eva. So I'm going to turn it back over.
So connecting to what Mr. Kaufman said about the waterfall, thinking about 2 years ago, where did you even know what a waterfall on Zoom would be? It's a whole new language. So when we think about where we were with technology 3 years ago versus self-assessing ourselves, where we are now, I'm somewhere in the middle. You know, I have not learned all the bells and whistles, but certainly I think that we can all say that we've had collective growth and met significant success. I'm not saying that word anymore. Goals moving forward. So we're going to move on to student self-assessments. We're going to go into some examples, give you an opportunity to explore. We're going to start off with a question. So feel free to unmute or put in the chat whatever you are most comfortable doing. In your view, what are the benefits? What's the most beneficial aspect of using student self-assessments? So we'll take about 30 seconds, think about that, and feel free to unmute or put it in the chat. Yes, Lorianne, ownership of learning. And I love the fact that you use the word ownership of learning. It must be a common theme. Ownership, reflection, yes, creates an awareness. Intrinsic motivation, excellent point, Catherine. Metacognition, yes, one of my favorite words. Thank you, Mr. Kaufman. Absolutely. So those are definitely some benefits to student self-assessment. And I want to just highlight what Dylan William was saying in his video about how it is much easier to provide feedback to others in a very objective way versus when we self-reflect. It's hard admitting when we don't know something, even as adults. So when you are in an elementary school, especially middle school and high school, where there are a lot of social aspects to really talking about feedback, the relational and the taking ownership and creating a self-efficacy space where really they're okay with making mistakes and they grow from those mistakes. So I just wanted to highlight that from his video. Go ahead, Amanda. Right, like you said, it promotes the ownership and reflection. It deepens that understanding of where the learner is going and where they are. Promotes academic integrity, right? Being honest and being able to be transparent about where you are and how you're going to get there without judgment is really a part of why we should use student self-assessment. We're directing our learning. We're taking ownership, as a lot of people have said. Creates motivation and efficacy. Efficacy is the belief that we can do something and do something well. And student self-assessment and peer self-assessment really encapsulates the ways that we can build self-efficacy through modeling, through verbal persuasion and feedback. Those are all great ways to promote self-efficacy. And it really helps develop a range of skills. Being able to speak to your teacher and be able to explain and articulate where you think you are, and having that dialogue after a self-assessment is so essential to be able to really move that learning forward. So we are actually going to do a little bit of a different activity in breakout rooms. I think some of you are actually in one room together. So we have set up the breakout rooms as best as we could and have assigned rooms. So before we get there, we'll walk you through the process. You're going to actually answer these 3 questions. And breakout rooms 1 through 3 are going to answer question 1. So I'll say that again, breakout room or 1 through 3 are going to answer question 1. Breakout rooms 4, 5, and 6 are going to answer question 2. And breakout room 7, 8, and 9 are going to answer question 3. And we have our rooms set up for you and all ready to go. And we'll tell you which room that you will be in. We're going to do the same thing with the peer assessment. So when Amanda comes and does her section on the peer assessment, you're going to do the same thing. So we're going to put a link in the chat to the Jamboard. You're going to answer the question that you were assigned based on your room and choose a recorder and your tool of choice on the Jamboard. If you're familiar with Jamboard, you have a different ways that you can actually respond to it. You'll see that these are blue. These are connected to the self-assessment pieces of our Jamboard. And on the left-hand side, you'll see a tool board. You can actually enter in text, or you can do a Post-it note. These are another, again, modeling of just something that you can do in your classroom with your students to do some self-assessment. This is a great strategy and interactive way to incorporate technology to do a self-assessment. So that being said, we are going to send everyone to the breakout rooms, and we will do this. We'll give you about 5 minutes. We'll come back and have someone share out from each of the groups and collect your responses, and we're ready to go. Those breakout rooms set up.
Eva, are they labeled, the breakout rooms?
They're just numbered. And
Okay.
actually, Amanda, can you flip to?
I was going to say, I know there was a slide for it.
There is. It is slide 37. And you're getting a preview of some of the self-assessment strategies that we're going to use. These are the rooms that you're assigned to. So room 1, Sharon City with IU4. I'm not going to read this to you. You can find where you're at. But just noting that if you're with an intermediate unit and supporting one of your teams that are here today, or a patent representative, please feel free to float around. We try to group you into teams so that you have the ability to work and collaborate together today, because if you want to move forward with the Credly badging, you have an opportunity to discuss and explore, starting from the very beginning, what it is that most interests you as a team in a professional learning community.
How self-assessment is more formative, whereas a self-grading is more summative.
Absolutely. Thank you, Megan, for elevating that point. Yes, when we think about grading, there's a quantity or a number attached to it. And again, our formative assessment is to inform. So thank you, Megan and Nicole. Group 3, is there anything that you want to add? If not, you can drop it in the chat. Let's look at question number 2. All right, got some Post-it notes in there. So Thank you, Amanda, for moving that out of the way, or whoever did that. What level of self-awareness do your students currently have? How might self-assessment strategies impact that? So groups 4, 5, and 6, please feel free to unmute and go ahead and share your takeaways.
Hi, I'm Gina Nieder, and we're with York Suburban School District. We just talked about that our students had a limited self-awareness.
That's a really good point. Really good point. Right? Talking about how it's really, it can go either way. We can be really hard on ourselves when we're self-assessing, or we can be completely unaware that we are where we are. And it's true for students, especially when they're developing emotionally and maturity wise. So good point. Someone else.
Hi, I'm Clay Laco from Walnut Pawpack area. We talked a lot about self-awareness being contextually dependent. I think our kids are very self-aware in certain contexts, but in school contexts, perhaps not so much. We talked about school culture is not designed to promote self-awareness. Kids don't do a lot of work that requires them to be self-aware, which is a big part of this day, right? Because you can't do really high quality formative assessment work unless you have work that you can sink your teeth in from your students. And quite frankly, students aren't used to doing that level of work. It's very rare in most schools. So that's what we kind of talked about.
Thank you. And was there any conversation of why you believe, or what your hypothesis is regarding like why students aren't as self-aware?
I think a lot of it stems from a culture that is hyper-focused on achievement as defined by grades, and a testing culture that focuses on preparation. So there's a lot of things surrounding that don't promote a lot of deep thought and risk-taking academically. They just don't. And yet that's most of what our kids do. So it's a really deeply embedded culture. And we also notice that when we push back on that culture with students, they push right back on us, because you're breaking the rule. You're not playing school anymore. The quid pro quo is not being followed. That's uncomfortable and really hard. So
Yeah.
we talked about norm establishment at the very beginning of the year, especially, and scaffolding this work so that it's not too overwhelming, because it can be too overwhelming and it will backfire if you're not careful.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. You have to be vulnerable, and you brought up a very good point where culture and the climate, setting that tone at the beginning of the year is critical if we're going to get to the depth of knowledge that students really need to be at and to move the work forward. So thank you for sharing that. Is there anything else that someone would like to share regarding question number 2?
Eva, there was a comment in the chat too.
Okay,
You want to check that one out?
sure. Yeah, thank you, Lori. Teachers have told me students won't do an assignment if it's not graded. That doesn't leave room for growth and feedback before the grade, right? So I'm wondering, what social emotional awareness do we have to develop in students if we're really going to get to the point where formative assessment through peer and self-assessment, or even feedback, is meaningful and authentic? It takes a lot of planning. It takes a lot of trust building. It takes a lot of vulnerability on the adult's part as well, maybe modeling what it's like to make a mistake in, and we're going to talk about that moving forward. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. Really great points that you're all making, and having our own self-awareness is really important to recognize these things that are barriers, so that we can get students on board to actually doing it alongside of us. Thank you, Amanda. Go ahead. Question or board number 3. And shout out to group number 1, 2, or 3 who put the photo. You achievers, you. Awesome job. And question number 3 is, to what extent would you consider incorporating self-assessment into the student grading process? And we have 3 comments there, giving them a portion of their grade. Oh, good suggestion. Having students practice self-assessment and more on grading. We needed more time. So that being said, anyone in group 7, 8, or 9 that wants to speak to their conversation or what they shared on the board? And these would be representatives from Achievement House, Collegium Charter School, or Mass Insight. Any of you?
And we'll take that into consideration that we might need more time for the next Jamboard.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate the feedback that you needed more time.
Is that you?
Hey, guys.
Hi, Mr. Kaufman. A little bit of an echo, but go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to pass it off to one of my colleagues.
Perfect.
You're on.
Hi, so I'm Miss Morrison. And I'm from Collegium Charter. There's like 6 of us in here, and we were talking about that it's really hard to know how accurate the students are going to be, or if they're just going to tell you that, oh, I did really good work on this, so that you would get those effort points. And that some of us do practice self-grading. So like I think you said for their homework, right? Like for math homework in class, they do self-grade. And I know that I do a lot of like, when we go, they have to have an assignment completed, and then we go over it as a class, and they're supposed to be following along and like seeing how much of the answer they got right and like filling it in before they turn it in for a grade. But it's kind of, for us, we think it's hard for the middle schoolers to really know how much effort they're putting in and like acknowledge potential shortcomings because they're afraid of it impacting. And we were all really resonating with what the last person who spoke said about students not doing work if it's not graded. We were saying that a lot of us had to put that in our sub plans, that the points, they were going to get points for the assignment that they were doing today, so that the students would actually complete the work. So they're not ready to self-assess, maybe because they haven't been taught how to. And that is something that does really, I feel like, need to start at the beginning of the year.
Excellent point. And it brings me back to what we had mentioned earlier about understanding the why it's important to be able to self-assess even when there's not a grade attached to it. So good point. Anyone else? Group from group 7, 8, or 9. Okay. Well, we will take that. Excellent job. Thank you for your impact and feedback. We really appreciate it. And we are going to pick up where we left off and start exploring some of those concrete, hopefully engaging activities that you can do within your classroom. A lot of you are actually brought out these very important points with getting started with self-assessment, knowing the why, understanding why it's important, even though there's not a grade attached, actually teaching them what the strategies are, modeling the mistakes, modeling the metacognition. If you're using a whiteboard, or if you're using, this is maybe I'm dating myself, an Elmo on a projector screen, old school transparencies, right? I don't know if we're there anymore, but just really highlighting and elevating mistakes. I know sometimes in my classroom, some of the things that I would do is intentionally create mistakes so that they would point them out. And I use that as a teachable moment, and appreciating the fact that I can grow. If you're familiar with the Self-Efficacy Institute, they talk about FATF, which is failure and difficulty are feedback. So knowing that when we do fail and when it is difficult, that is a way to provide feedback to ourselves, and being able to recognize that through practice, acknowledgement and accountability, really reinforcing and promoting that social aspect, especially with middle school. When I think about, they don't want to make a mistake in front of their peers. How can we acknowledge them for being brave in a space where they're talking about their very personal work at times. And of course, we want to make sure that we're being consistent. Now we're going to actually take a look at, really I'm going to highlight 4 key strategies or 4 strategies that are used for self-assessment. And then I'll talk a little bit about traffic light, stoplight. That is very common. Red, yellow, green cards. Sometimes do a quick assessment with your thumbs up, sideways. Yeah, I'm great. I'm not sure. No, not at all. Those are, again, formative assessment, and students are self-reflecting and self-assessing where they are in the lesson or the content or the activity at that moment. So we're going to look at exit or ticket cards through 3, 2, 1 reflection. And these are all on your Padlet, and you're going to have a chance to go back into your breakout rooms and explore these for about 20 to 25 minutes, and then decide where you might like to utilize these in your classroom. Go ahead, Amanda. So the first one is 3, 2, 1 reflection. Again, it's an example of an exit card or an exit strategy that you can use, and you can do this in different formats, paper and pencil, sticky notes, and again, self-assessment strategies that really think of what have I learned? What are 2 questions that I have? What is one thing that you found interesting? So 3, 2, 1. I've seen this also done in triangle, square, and circle. Just different ways to make it interesting and change it up and really get them to reflect and think about things in a way that are more concrete. The next one is a mind map or a concept map. These, again, you can incorporate technology. It incorporates creativity. Some students who really thrive in really using creative arts and in drawing, and or even doing what do they call it, like a mosaic. You could use this a concept map to really start with a main idea and represent their learning in just different formats and modes. And here's a real fancy one coming up where it's elaborate and colorful. They talk about solving global warming. And I'm pretty sure that my brain would operate like that, just, different concepts and different ideas all over the place and really drilling down. I've seen this a lot in expository writing and persuasive writing. Again, ELA person here. Just again, another way to bring in creativity and skills and interest in a way that allows them to really reflect on where they are and where they're going. Reflection journals. I've seen them just use as one of a handwriting journal, just a plain book, but I've also seen them where you can purchase reflective journals that have actually checklists embedded within them to really monitor their progress, do a little bit of a different type of self-assessments, because checklists are a way to really self-assess, but this takes a little bit deeper based on what they have. This particular one that we discovered was a self-assessment, a peer assessment, and then teacher feedback. So this took them through 3 ways to engage in formative assessment for an end product, or to make sure that they're meeting that criteria and hitting those learning targets. And Amanda actually kind of did an activity like this. It's first word, last word. How has my learning changed from the beginning? Write down one word that stood out to you, or what you're thinking about in terms of whatever the content is or whatever the lesson may cover. And then at the end of the lesson, how has your learning changed? What is one word or a phrase? A good example to do this was Camp Harmony, when we read about the Japanese internment camps. The short passage was called Camp Harmony. I asked the students, what do you think about, or what do you think about Camp Harmony? And I had them draw a picture and write words. So it was almost a combination of a concept map and the first word, last word. And at the end, I had them draw a picture of what their learning was now in comparison to what it was at the beginning. And it was a really big takeaway for them to see the difference between what they thought Camp Harmony was at first versus what it actually was in the literature and what was shared. Thanks, Amanda. All right, so you're going to get a chance to explore the tools and strategies in your breakout rooms. We're going to use the same 9 as we did before. I know some people weren't able to get into a breakout room or didn't seem that they were. So if you're having issues, let us know and then we'll take care of that. I just want to elevate the last 2. The traffic light I touched upon a little bit. However, number 5, the exam and homework wrappers. I believe that Mr. Kaufman, your group or your team that are working together touched upon this a little bit. And it's really looking at, in terms of homework or an exam, a quantitative piece or a summative piece that they have, and thinking about how they did. I've seen this at the collegiate level, and they really look at how I studied. What are their study skills? Did I spend more time doing looking at vocabulary versus looking at content? So that was just an example. We have a link that we can drop in the chat, and I also linked it to the Padlet if you want to explore those exam and homework wrappers a little bit deeper moving forward and while you're in your breakout rooms.
I'm Mr. Schultz. Miss Morrison and I both teach 7th grade social studies. We mostly talked about successful strategies that we utilized and how they could be either modified for some of these self-assessments or how they're similar. So like one that we really talked about was the first word, last word. And it's very similar to a activity that we did at the beginning of our current unit, which we called consensus mapping. Basically, we're trying to come to a consensus of a topic before we actually start exploring the topic. And it's typically with a bigger topic that we're going over. So our topic for this unit is slavery. So a lot of people have very big opinions or notions about it. So we try to come to a consensus about that topic before we actually get into it and teach it. That way they're able to be like, oh, so I was kind of right, but also there's more to it. And another one, did we talk about another one?
Well, we also, we kind of combined like a reflection journal and like the exam wrappers. We tend to use like a Google form reflection either at the end of the quarter. But Mr. Schultz, he just started using it at the end of units to get feedback from students about what did they understand, like what topics resonated with them, as well as what like could they do to improve performance and how did they feel about their performance before they even get a grade back on the assignment.
Right.
It kind of helps identify like the self-talk that our students have, because a lot of our students do really well in our class, but they feel like the first thing I get, oh, well, I failed that test. And so it kind of helps us to be like, okay, well, you said you failed this test, you actually got an 89% on it. So like, how does that, like, is that failure to you, or why are we being so negative when we, you know, clearly do know what you're talking about?
And I found this was an effective method for the end of the unit survey because first off, it's anonymous, so they're able to answer freely. And I also utilized it to see if there was any other strategies that I can use in my class. Most were like, no, you're a great teacher, but there were some that were like, hey, we did this at the beginning of the year. Can we go back to doing this? And, you know, it was good reflection for not just them, but also for myself as well.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. I love the fact that you use your best practices, what worked for you, modified and adapted according to what you needed and what you wanted the outcome to be with those students, and especially with difficult concepts and topics. So mapping that out in different ways, just outstanding. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you for sharing how you really worked as a professional learning community and taking the different strategies and again, adapting them to really meet your needs and the needs of your students, as well as improve your own practice. So that super kudos in that space. Anyone else? Key takeaways, something that you may not have heard, want to share?
This is Faith Maven from Achievement House. We talked about just kind of adapting some of these strategies a lot of us teach special education. I'm in the life skills level at a cyber charter school. So we talked about using like the traffic light strategy, but using emojis in the chat to allow them to give us like a thumbs up, like a I'm okay or I need more help kind of thing with whatever topic we were talking about. We also talked about the exit tickets or the exit slips. Instead of doing like a writing, I'm giving them some pictures to circle to be able to say like, I don't know, depending on what we're talking about, circle one thing you learned, you know, and then they can circle that picture that like most stood out to them during the lesson that day or something like that. So just being able to adapt them for the lower level learners.
Thank you so much for bringing that out and elevating, you know, our learners who may need additional support, you know, students with IEPs, you know, we have to follow their SDIs. And how are you taking these different strategies and adapting to your students' needs? So excellent, Faye. Thank you for, again, bringing that out and bringing it to the forefront that we can use it in a wide range and on a continuum of depth and breadth. So thank you. One last group, if you don't mind sharing out, and then we're going to move on to the peer assessment piece. We're fast approaching our break, I promise. Was there, let's pose it this, was there a strategy that you just did not care for? What would you not use and perhaps why? All right, I think everyone is in a need for some serious coffee.
Yes.
Reboost. I'm there with you. So we are going to transition to peer assessment. Thank you to those teams and groups who took the time to share, really reflected on what it is that you were looking at and key takeaways. So appreciate your participation.
Okay, so like Eva said, we're going to take a break now before we start digging into peer assessments. So we will take a 15-minute break. So if Okay, so now we're going to get started with peer assessment after Eva talked all about self-assessment. So again, we'll be setting the stage here with a question. So in your view, what are some of the benefits of peer assessment? And if you could just go ahead and you can throw those in the chat, or if I can have people unmute, I mean, that's great too, now that you've had that extra cup of coffee. So whichever way you want to do it, chat or feel free to unmute. Benefits of peer assessment in your opinion or your view? Okay, purposeful collaboration helps both peers. Yes, absolutely. Perfect. Students get a response from someone their own age. Okay. And like Dylan Williams said, sometimes our students are tougher critics than, we are as the adults in the room. They can see other ways to be successful, collaboration with others and learning from one another. And actually, I'm going to give you the 5 conditions that collaboration can really lead to achievement. So very good. Motivation for students, collaboration. It promotes reflection and provides useful, constructive feedback. Wonderful. And actually, the strategies that we will go through for peer assessment today, a lot of those you could also use for self-assessment. I just wanted to point that out. A lot of these strategies, for the purposes of our presentation, we separated them, but they can really be used, a lot of them, for both peer and self-assessment. And the peer assessment strategies that we'll go over really gives them a framework for how to critique others' work or how to look at their peers' work. All right, well, thank you for your participation. So moving into peer assessment, here are 4 benefits of peer assessment. So when we use peer assessment, we're empowering our students to take on and manage the responsibility for their own learning. I think this is really important. So often as teachers, we feel like we're dragging kids along. And really when we're using peer assessment and self-assessment, we're empowering them to manage that. We're also enabling students to learn to assess and give others constructive feedback to develop those assessment skills. And like I talked about, the strategies that we're going to use for peer assessment will really give you a framework for how to have your peers assess each other. And then enhance students' learning throughout or through knowledge and diffusion and exchanging ideas with one another. And then it motivates students to engage with that content more deeply. It's not just the delivery, we're then assessing that and really looking at it with a critical eye. So here are those 5 conditions that I talked about very briefly when I saw that comment in the chat. But these 5 conditions for cooperative learning and students using a resource for one another, when these 5 conditions occur, cooperative learning can really increase student achievement. So the first being a perceived positive interdependence. So this is probably the most important one. They have to feel like they're all in the same boat, that they're not left to their own devices. So making sure that they have learned the assigned material themselves, and then also making sure that the others that they're working with in a group have also learned that material. So really taking that ownership. And then promoting considerable positive interaction, face-to-face interactions. This can really help when students are working with one another. Also perceived individual accountability. So making sure that they're accountable to the group, not only for that material and learning that, but also that they're accountable to give feedback to their peers. Frequent use of small groups. So the thing I want to point out here is with small groups, we really have to teach our students how to work cooperatively with one another and teach some of those social skills. So if you did attend the questioning and discussion, we did talk about some of those. And if you're interested in having any of the discussion and questioning strategies that we talked about, we could give you those. But really modeling and training students on how to interact with one another is a practice that needs to be done in our classrooms, so we can use small groups. And then finally, the frequent group processing on their current functioning. So having them as that cooperative group reflect on how are we functioning as a group? Are we listening to one another? Are we being respectful of one another? Am I contributing as a group member? And are the rest of my group members contributing back to me? So these 5 conditions can really help when you're using cooperative learning and you want to see achievement as a result. So looking here, we're going back into our Jamboard activity. So we have here 3 considerations that you should be taking into account when thinking about using peer assessment strategies. So what are the benefits of embedding co-created success criteria into a rubric that students are using to peer assess? How would you provide feedback about feedback? What would you do to create a safe environment that supports peer assessment? So thinking about these questions, like I said, we're going to go back into that Jamboard. I will pull that up for you in a moment. This time we're looking at the last 3 boards. They are in black with white print. And if you could pick someone to share out, that would be great. I do think my colleague put in the Jamboard. Thank you so much, Sherry. And she also put in a resource about peer assessment that you could reference during this Jamboard on peer assessment. So we are going back to work on the Jamboard. So groups 1, 2, and 3, if you were in those breakouts, you're going to focus on, it's actually question 4 now, slide or board 4. If you were in group 4, 5, and 6, you're looking at question 5 or by board 5. And then 7, 8, and 9, you're looking at the 6th board or that 6th question. So we will take, I believe, Eva, last time, did we do 5 minutes? And we needed some more time. So this time we'll go up to 7, see if that helps. And if not, throw in the chat that you need extra time and we're flexible. So we can be flexible with that.
You ready?
Ready.
All right, see you back here in 7 minutes.
Okay. Believe they're officially closed, and here comes everyone back to our main room. So thank you for those conversations in your breakout rooms. Hopefully everyone was able to pick a speaker to share out on each of these questions. So our first question, what are the benefits of embedding co-created success criteria into a rubric that students are using to peer assess one another? So if I could have someone unmute from that group, that would be fantastic. I'm only going to ask one from each question just because I want to be cognizant of our time here. So anybody from
I can
group
do it.
one? Oh, wonderful. Hi,
we said-
Joe.
Hello. We said that students have ownership of what they are assessing and held accountable because it's kind of like maybe more motivation because the team type of atmosphere.
Okay, absolutely. So when the students are a part of creating that criteria, they'll be more engaged with that content, hopefully, and they're more accountable. Absolutely. Thank you, Joe. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's go on to board 5. So how would you provide feedback about student-led feedback? So that feedback about feedback, if you will. So anyone from group 2. Oh, someone said they love the high five picture. I believe that was on the last slide. Yes, so there it is again. Perfect. Okay, so group 2, feedback about student-led feedback or about the feedback that they're giving to one another. Anyone in group 2? Oh. Someone in the room probably has to turn something off.
Hi. I can talk about
Sure.
ours. We talked about good, like good job is not good feedback, that kids need to learn to be more specific, and that as the teacher, we should really model the type of feedback that we want them to give each other and showing them. And we even talked about possibly giving them like, you know, like sentence starters or like phrase starters or words to try to use so that they would use good vocabulary options versus some of their own lingo to give feedback to each other.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more because I mean, even as a newer teacher, I would be, good job. That's great. Good job. But it wasn't specific enough for my students. My students really needed that specific feedback, not just the timely feedback. So modeling and then teaching our students how to do that is critical to make peer assessment work. It can't just be, oh, that looks good. So, you know, for this really to be one of those strategies that will lead to achievement, we absolutely need to be modeling this and teaching them how to do it. I love the idea of sentence starters. And that's something that you could definitely scaffold from the beginning and then, you know, pull back as you see that students are doing it. Love it. Perfect. Okay, and our final one, oh, look how organized. Somebody must know on here that I'm a Birds fan. Love me some Philadelphia Eagles. I'm so happy we're going to the Super Bowl. Just sad I'm not going this time. But okay, anybody that can share, how do we create that safe environment that supports peer assessment?
Hi, this is Marissa Donlevy from Collegium, and we pretty much talked a lot about how like our students need that direct instruction, even on things that we think that they should know how to do, especially because they lost 2 years of very formative time. And so we need to model and explain things that for us might seem like at this stage, like you're in middle school, you should know what you're doing, but they might not. So explicitly teaching like how to respond to mistakes and what is an appropriate way to correct behavior, and creating that culture of error and acknowledging that like we too are human and sharing times when we've made mistakes. And also like anytime possible, trying to find a way to make that feedback anonymous or something where they can feel like they can have that honest conversation without receiving the judgment from their peers. Just developmentally, middle schoolers, that's what it's all about. It's the judgment of your peers. So if we can have, whether it be private conversations or Google Forms or like the stoplight activity from the previous breakout group, or something that they can have that peer conversation without having to make it like a big thing and display of their error if possible, but also finding better ways to respond to the error than the classic, a student answers a question, you're like, not quite. Anybody else? having a better way to respond in those situations so that students feel encouraged to try, and know that even if they are making a mistake, that they're still supported.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. So, and I did see that my colleague Eva starred one of the things that we believe that is one of the things you put up there, not assuming your students know how to do simple tasks and taking the time to walk them through it, really training them, reviewing expectations. And this happens a lot with behavior, right? We think that they know all of our expectations for sharpening a pencil, throwing away garbage, working with others, but no, they don't. And we have to model that. And I think especially, and you said you're a middle school, but even at the high school level, our students really need to know, and we need to teach them what we expect from them, and then also model that. I would like to know, I think I know why you put Jason Kelsey up there, but would anyone like to share?
I mean, it's kind of oh, crap. Sorry. It's self-explanatory, I think.
Okay.
Right?
All right.
I mean, it's Jason Kelsey. If he was teaching me, I'd listen.
Yeah, for sure. And Jalen Hurts. I'm a Jalen Hurts fan. Okay, so we will get off the football talk and I will go back to, and any of you who are from the West Side, if Pittsburgh was in the Super Bowl, I would root for them too. So we need everyone to root for our Eagles. Okay, so let me go back here. And moving on. So here are just some things that as you're getting started with peer assessment, some things to consider. So what are some of those assignments and activities that might be beneficial? So maybe you have activities and assignments right now that would be beneficial to incorporate some peer assessment. Also look at your assignments. Can we break them down into smaller pieces and then incorporate either peer or self-assessment along the way? Again, looking at rubrics, we talked about that, and really having students be a part of creating that criteria, and then introducing those rubrics through learning exercises to ensure that they are able to use them effectively. Because I think that's sometimes maybe a stage that we miss, but do they even know how to use that rubric? And then determine whether peer review activities are going to be an in-class or an out-of-class type thing. Having students learn how to carry out peer assessment by modeling. We talked a lot about that. Also the feedback, the idea of those sentence starters was a great scaffold that could be used. And then incorporating small feedback groups when you're doing written comments or assignments. So we're going to really dig in now to these 5 strategies, and we're going to go through those. So carousel, I think this is a pretty popular teaching strategy. We often use this when we're brainstorming and want to figure out what we want students or what they already know about a topic, but we can also use this to critique work. So placing students' work along the room and having students get up and give peer feedback is a way that we can use this carousel strategy. Another is commit and toss. So this is actually to be used as an anonymous peer evaluation, and it's also a rating strategy. So it's where students are encouraged to evaluate their peers' effort. So if you're interested in an anonymous way, this would be a great strategy to dig in. I know somebody had mentioned about that. 2 stars and a wish. I'm dressed for this strategy today, I guess you could say. So this is a reflection strategy, and this gives them a framework for how to respond to peers' work. So they're looking for 2 positives, those are our stars, and then a wish, some sort of reflection on an area that they would want that student or peer to improve upon. Looking here at rubrics, I found this fun one just as a picture. So if you have a partner who's bringing breakfast in bed, you could use this rubric. So food, presentation, comfort. So having some of those conditions along the side, what are those ratings? And then what does that look like here? And we do have, I believe, on the Padlet, a really great resource with, I think it's Cornell, to dig into some rubrics. Chain notes. Chain notes is just providing students an opportunity to examine others' ideas. So, and then they can expand on those as well and compare it to their own thinking. So again, some questions to consider. So what strategy are you going to explore? Thinking about some takeaways for your group, and then anything about one of those strategies that surprised you. We did have some time with the Padlet before, so we are going to allocate another 20 minutes or so. And this is where you also might want to consider as a group, what are some of your next steps for peer and self-assessment? Are you thinking about implementing multiple strategies for both? Because we have given you some pretty simple strategies. Are you all as a team going to focus on one and focus your PLC around that strategy? So just thinking about some of those next steps for yourself as a group. So here again, I think we all know what breakouts we're in by now, but if you do not, here they are. In the chat, we do have the links, I believe, for the peer assessment strategies. They put those in there, the ones that we should be focusing on. And all of these are available in the Padlet. So if we could put that in the chat, one of my colleagues, that would be fantastic. Eva, do you mind opening the breakout rooms this time so you can set the timer for 20 minutes? That way we have that. And then we'll come back and talk about these considerations.
Right. We're ready when you are.
I'm gonna re-enter those.
Wait, we have about 30 seconds until all of the rooms close. So hopefully everybody's heading back soon. Okay, it looks like everybody should be back here in the main room. So I will ask, I'm going to ask at least 3 people to volunteer if possible. So if we could get a volunteer, and if you don't want to come off mute, I totally understand. So you could go ahead and do that in the chat. But if you could, what were the strategies you explored? Did you talk about a particular strategy that you're going to implement within your building or LEA? What are your plans for implementation or takeaways, anything that you want to share? Are we tired again? I know we're getting close here to the end.
Hi, Erica Argenziano from Sharon City Schools. We talked about using rubrics, especially for projects, so that the kids can use them to evaluate them, get a better idea of like what they could have improved on, and from their own peer group perspective. So that was our biggest one that we liked the most.
Okay, great, Erica. Thank you. We appreciate you sharing. Anyone else?
So it's Clay Leco from Wall and Pawpack. We didn't really hone in on a specific strategy, but talked about perhaps combining strategies. But the conversation really was around how to prepare classroom cultures for this work when they're not used to doing this work, and using kind of a scaffolded approach, like for peer assessment, like so modeling what good feedback looks like, and then perhaps like a Socratic seminar or fishbowl kind of activity where you have students who might be a little bit more ready than others, who might be willing to demonstrate it, and then finally releasing it to the class to allow them to do the work on their own. So kind of establishing norms so that it ensures the success of getting good feedback from one's peers, rather than just diving in maybe to a strategy and expecting everybody to use it immediately.
Wonderful. Yeah, and Kelly agrees, and I think as do I, and I think I can talk for Eva, that classroom culture is so critical and the environment that you create to feel safe enough to not only put your work out there to receive feedback, but then also to have those relationships built that you can provide feedback to someone else. And Eva did put, we talked about Socratic seminar in our questioning and discussion. So she did put that Padlet in there. I think that you'll find some helpful resources for questioning and discussion. Talk Moves, I think, is a great way to scaffold to get students to really think about how to ask those questions. And it goes through different types of questions and how to address those with some sentence starters. So both of those resources, or that Padlet with those resources, could be helpful. Eva, did you want to jump in? I just saw that you were unmuted. Okay. All right. Anyone else want to share? We technically met my criteria because 2 people came off mute and we had one in the chat, but anybody else? I don't want to.
I can share ours real quick. Joe McGorian, Milford
Thanks, Joe.
Township. We talked about the chain notes, and we thought that was a great strategy for improving the depth of knowledge for the students, because you start with one topic or a question and then kind of pass it around within your group, and they can continuously add the information that they learned that maybe you missed upon, that the person before had missed. We thought it was less threatening and actually got more of the individuals in the group to participate. And then the neat thing about at the end, we thought that with other students in the classroom would have the opportunity then to critique that group's work, so that, you know, would even take that depth of knowledge even further, because the group that created that answered the question initially could also defend that.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing, Joe. Yeah, that I think is the point of using all of these strategies, right? We want to get to a deeper level of knowledge for all of this content, and using that strategy. I think that's a great point that you made. We can really get that deeper depth of knowledge. Okay, just wanted to make sure. Oh, Eva also put in the chat the K-20 Center. That's where a lot of those instructional strategy cards came from. It's through the University of Oklahoma. There are phenomenal resources on there. There's an entire PD on just rubrics alone with attached resources, great instructional strategies in a variety of topics. We just chose a few of those cards to highlight because obviously they related to this session today, but it is a phenomenal resource. So feel free to access that and check that out more in depth. So we are going to move on to our last mentee today, and we really want this to be a checkout for you. So let me stop sharing this one. I'll pull up the other. I think one of my colleagues will be putting that info in the chat. But if you could, what were you thinking as you came in today? So I came in thinking, and I'm leaving with. If you would go ahead, and we'll see that populate on the screen. And then we'll go into some implementation steps.
Amanda, I just put the code in the chat.
Oh, thank you.
Letting you know, Amanda, my chat is not updating.
That happened with Sherry as well. So if there's anything you need, let me know.
Sure.
Okay, so reflection is key resources and ideas that are useful. Great. We'll just wait a moment or two to get some more up here. Great. I love that people are leaving with strategies that they can go back tomorrow or in a few days and implement. Came in thinking my students I can't speak either, Eva, that I came in thinking my students would not be able to handle this, but leaving with ideas hopefully to implement. So that's great to hear. This is great feedback for us. Peer assessment and self-assessment could be time consuming, but you realize that there's simple, quick ways to do it. Awesome.
Right.
came in with apprehension and then leaving with some good ideas. Wonderful. That this would be a waste of my time, but now you're leaving with strategies that you'll use. That makes us very happy. So wonderful. I will tell a really quick story. I did a presentation at a conference on Monday about data, and someone told us that they came in, I forget what their came in was, but they were leaving with a headache. And I'm like, I'm hoping that doesn't happen today. We shared too much data with them. So hopefully that's not the case with all of you. We said maybe we needed Advil to talk about PBOS and e-metric data. So hopefully nobody has a headache here today. All right, I'm going to kick it back to Eva. Thank you for sharing that. Like I said, it's great feedback for us.
So for the sake of time, I am going to go quickly over like the next part. And it's related to if you decide to work as a professional learning community, taking it into practice and are interested in the badging requirements. So you have to attend all the sessions, today being one, and then the next one where you present would be April 20th. And then we have some resources and materials that actually can support you when you're coming back. I'm not going to read this slide to you. Let's get to the actual template to use. So if you could just indicate in the chat quickly if you are intending on presenting or not. We all actually have a form. Do you have that form?
Yeah, I did stick that, Eva, I did stick that in the chat.
Okay, great. So there's a form that only one member of your team, even if you divide into two groups, I know that some of you are working in larger groups and wanted to explore different resources. If you are interested or not in coming back and earning your badge, please fill out that form. It's going to be dropped in the chat. And we actually provide a template for you to present on when you come back on April 20th. And so this is the template. It is in the Padlet. We are here at any given time. Reach out to Amanda or myself or both of us, and we can help you and guide you through the process from start to finish at any given time. So this is the template that you can use. And it takes you through data sets. And Amanda's going to dive in a little bit more to the data piece of it because she is the data queen. And so I'll let you go ahead and take that.
Without giving headaches. So these 5 categories, the planning for self-assessment, et cetera, here, this is the pre-assessment that you took. So just looking at as an implementation team, counting up how many are S's and U's. So usually, sometimes, and rarely did you do this. So counting those up for each of these continuums as a pre, and then here we have the post. And you should see that as a PDF. We do have that document within the Padlet. So you could use that as a team and just check out your totals. Did your practices change? Hopefully they will after coming here, because now you have some quick strategies that you can implement. And like Eva said, if there are any questions about that template or next steps, you can always reach out to us.
All right, Amanda, I just have a question. Are you seeing, I put the implementation intention doc into the chat as well as the presentation template. Are you able to see that?
Yep, I do
Okay,
see
perfect.
that. And if one member from the team could fill that out, that would be fantastic. Oh, and I'm going to go back to our regular PowerPoint here. Okay. All right, and here's that implementation survey that Sherry put in the chat for you.
And at any given time, you would like someone to come out and support your team directly, your building directly, you have the luxury and the support of your intermediate units and your consultants. So please feel free to reach out to your intermediate units. There have been and are a couple representatives here. So we thank you for participating and supporting your schools and buildings. So you can request that as well at the building level.